poetry titled In the Land of My Dreams. It's about you realizing that some dreams you're gonna live here on earth and realizing them. By Nico. In the land of my dreams, I am held towards the darkness and light I shall never find. I am held from reaching my dreams and peace I shall never find. In the land of my dreams, power I shall never find, because I am a king to these destroyers. In the land of my dreams, I am lost in my own self, only to become their imperfections. In the land of my dreams, I am nothing to the one who is brought by friendship. In the land of my dreams, tests I used to teach, as if the one who created us used tests to teach that he's alive. In the land of my dreams, what I used to strive for perfection is used to destroy me. In the land of my dreams, folly flows freely like the ocean waters to control one building idea, like the ocean controls one ship until it is shipwrecked. In the land of my dreams, in the land of my dreams, in the land of my dreams, the fire that burns inside of me burns to make me gold, burns to make me bold, burns until the spirit inside of me cover it with their spirit, and it burns to cook their zealous jealousy. I wonder what they will become. I wonder with a great zeal, then they cover it too. I wonder what they will become. In the land of my dreams, in the land of my dreams, it affects reality.
Good morning. I'm Stephan from the University of Pretoria in South Africa, and I'll speak to you on an urban imagination as our theological vocation. African cities grow faster than any other cities on the planet. By 2020, or by 2050 rather, at least Kinshasa, Lagos, and Cairo will be among the 10 largest cities in the world. The cities of Africa and the world are places of huge opportunity, but also plagued with human and social catastrophe and unfathomable environmental risk. But perhaps the greatest challenge our cities pose is the lack of an imagination powerful enough to usher in radically new cities, cities that work for all its people, but especially for its weakest and vulnerable members. It is not that there are no imaginaries. The apartheid city was a very potent imaginary, but unjust and inhumane. One of the most important tasks I suggest for doing theology or practicing faith in our cities today is to foster an urban imagination. I would propose this as our vocation, our calling, our mandate. We are invited to discern and nurture the mind of Christ, the compassion, the kindness, courage, wisdom, and justice of Christ in relation to the greatest challenges our cities face today. An imagination drawing from the deep wells of Old Testament and New Testament scriptures, from the histories of people of faith and ordinary urban citizens who intervened in oppressive urban circumstances to make hope. From radical planners and geographers who dared to imagine new cities built from below, from ordinary people living in slums and inner cities and on the streets, making innovative ways to sustain themselves against the odds. An imagination of urban communities refusing to be slaves to external powers of capital and greed, refusing to succumb to the whims of party politicians who care about their pockets more than people, refusing to be slaves and victims of past oppressions and exclusions, adamant to carve out new futures on their own terms. Jesus saw her, the woman at the well. Late in the afternoon, when all the others were gone, tainted, he saw her. She represented a vision of a labeled woman from Samaria, a people that were not central in the imagination of the temple. He sat by her. He knew the truth about her past and the potentials in her future. And instead of keeping her caught in an oppressive narrative, their brief, intimate proximity turned this labeled, marginalized woman into a carrier of the good news. When we see her, she is given the right to imagine herself afresh. When she is seen, she becomes the one who organizes a whole town to go after Jesus so they can see him. Cities in which slum dwellers and homeless persons and LGBTI communities and children in high-rise buildings and city officials and people of faith and business and university all collaborate, imagining something brand new together. We can and should not do it alone. Do you see her? Do you hear her? Do we feel her pain? Are we ever close enough so that together we can imagine beyond the trappings and dominant stories of her past and our collective past? We should be open to the rushing wind of the Spirit blowing through the streets and neighborhoods, not only to refresh for a brief moment or to renew on the surface, but to transform completely. We should discern and imagine the kind of infrastructure that's now missing, that condemns people and communities to less than human lives. When there is a small flood in Douala, thousands are at risk. Recently, again, bulldozers swept through the livelihoods of families, women and children in the slums of Kibera. And in the poor communities in and around Manila, COVID-19 meant for many hunger and possible starvation. Some people are perpetually kept from the safety nets of health, social care, education, housing and justice in our cities. Do we see them in queues that never stop? And how then do we, body of Christ, respond? The global pandemic in some ways caught us off guard and surfaced the fault lines in our societies. In cities where collaboratives have been built with great care over 20 or 30 years, these came together in bold demonstrations of love during COVID-19. But where pride and competition kept people isolated, and politicians and communities at war with each other, the disaster of the pandemic was even more acute. And so we have to ask, where do we want to see our cities by 2050? If we want healthy cities by 2050, we better do the right things now. We do it for the next generation, for the next pandemic, but we also do it for today because millions in our cities face crisis every day. For the homeless persons in temporary shelters, COVID-19 was not their big fear, but the closure of the shelters after lockdown is what gripped them with fear. Do we hear them? If you create a small community now with little resource, if you sow seeds now, if you create your first small housing project now or health clinic, or partner with one neighborhood that lacks sewage and sanitation to create the infrastructure, or a small alternative schooling system backed with evidence of why it works, and you then allow for it to organically grow with the right nurture of God's people, to root itself and to grow over the next 10 and 20 and 30 years. And when you then wake up from the dream, apart from being much older, you will look back and not believe what God has done. If we want healthy cities by 2050, wherever we are, we better do the right things now. It starts with a small step of faith and faithfulness now. You never know where that step might take you. The enormity of the urban challenge asks of us bolder imaginations than all of us together in this conference. It means some of us have to reimagine ourselves. We don't only need pastors, there's a need for community developers, health activists, educators, city managers, recreationalists, healers, bankers, housing developers, planners, all submitting our collective knowledge and passion to the greater picture that's waiting to be discovered in each of our cities. Do we see her? God in the small ones, God in the slums, God in the backyard dwellings, dreaming of another day. We are an instant culture where people rise to the top too quick and move to the next gig even quicker. But the work of God's household, the careful work of kneading the yeast into the dough, takes time. You will hurt in the process. You might break at times. You might burn out. Friends and comrades might betray you like Judas did. They who dreamt with you for many years might have faked it. Consider the cost. But if we don't start now, there might be little to show in 2050. No infrastructure, no collaborative movements, little resilience, no courage, no hope. It has to start now. Drawing from the prophetic imaginings of people like Walter Brueggemann and Emmanuel Katangole, of Bell Hooks and Djembe Tefera and Ben Beltran, and Cornel West, Jean-Marc Ella, Micheline Kamba. And if you don't know who these people are, go find them and make them your companions. Imagination needs companionship of others, daring to imagine new and brave and different things. Drink from the wells of those living in the occupation known as Sissy Ghoul House in Woodstock, Cape Town, resisting displacement. Or those who lived on the dumping sites of Smoky Mountain in Manila and imagined their site to become a vibrant eco-neighborhood, which is now an example after 30 years for the rest of Southeast Asia. The imagination I speak of is not pie in the sky fairy tale stuff for people with nothing better to do. It's not a top-down visioning exercise by urban experts and professionals. I want to draw from the planning scholar and activist John Friedman, who spoke of the urgent necessity for utopian visions, visions of better cities than the ones we now have. If we want to be faithful citizens and neighbors and disciples of Jesus in the cities of the world, we need to foster utopian visions, to push back at the divided city, to create viable neighborhoods in what once were slums without displacing anyone, to treat the humanity of every person as sacred and every space as sacred, as if it is Jesus approaching us from there. I love how Friedman describes utopian visions for the city. He provides a simple but powerful structure. Friedman says, utopian urban visions are not pie-in-the-sky dreams for one day when we no longer exist. Instead, an utopian vision is a clear program of action for today, combining four things: critique and criticism, concrete constructive vision, political strategies for action, and bold collaborative action. We have to critique death, the erasure of the vulnerable and frail and homeless, of the other who is not like us. We have to critique policies that are not pro-poor and pro-earth. To do that well, we need to learn the languages and skills of urban policymaking. We have to critique our own feeble faith that fails to believe that the city can indeed be transformed. The failure of the church to embrace the city of God. And then instead of being paralyzed by critique, we have to create vivid, concrete, and constructive imaginaries of the alternative, the city and neighborhood, the church, the university that should be. And then instead of being stuck in our minds or dreams, we have to create the theo-political strategies fueled by faith that will bring the imaginations to life. Without strategy, we will fail. Our strategies should be for how we will outmaneuver crooked politicians, how we will implement alternative economic models, how we will protect the land rights of the dispossessed, how we will roll out housing and health care for all in need of it, depending what your city's greatest issues are. The police is the city. Politics is the management of the city's resources. And if the earth and all its resources belong to God, then the management of the city's resources is politics, is to steward well what God has given us. And that is why I want to suggest that everything that is political is also theological, and everything that is theological is also political. The fact that there are 5,000 or 6,000 homeless people on the streets of Tshwane is a political issue of sharing the resources of the city more justly, but also a theological issue of meeting Jesus in the homeless person and offering him shelter and dignified care. That is why I call it theopolitical strategies, faith-based strategies that will change the way the city works, that will infiltrate spaces and policies and processes. By doing nothing, we make a political choice. By faking neutrality, we make a political choice. By protesting on the streets, we make a political choice. It is not whether we are political, it is a question of how we are political and whether we can learn to practice the politics, the economy, the authority, the mind of Jesus or not. Our task of imagination should start outside the gate of the city with those not yet at the city's table. The migrants, and children, and recyclers, and vendors, those pushed aside. And from places of such proximity, we should then start to push together to open up temples and churches and squares and budgets until they who are outside the city's gates will be seated in places of honor. What about the church? I said little about the church. I'm reminded of Vuyani Vellam's wrenching critique, speaking of a church that still sits on top of the dungeons below which or inside which slaves are kept. Or as Danny Pilario in the Philippines asks, is the church an instrument of empire, a perpetuator of dungeon, or an active voice and participant in the lives of the urban poor and those outside the gate of the city, outside infrastructure that gives life and opportunity? Part of our imagining should be to reimagine church completely, attending to the Jesus before Christianity distorted him. We have to reimagine ourselves if we are to be faithful companions of God and the cities we are in. The remaking of our institutions, our urban institutions, is up to us. Either we remake them or we birth new ones, because we cannot contain the imaginations of the Spirit in old wineskins. May you burst with hope. May your imaginations of what God is up to in your city know no bounds. May the excitement of the journey always outweigh the pain and sacrifice. And when you are ready to give up, may you find a new companion, a story, a reminder that God is in the journey, long before you and I. Don't miss her. Do you see her?